Imagine two of the world's most influential figures, a former president and this huge tech titan suddenly just locked in this very public, very heated feud.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what sparks something like that. And maybe more importantly, what does it actually tell us about, power and liberty in society today?
Exactly. So today, we're doing a deep dive into that dramatic clash between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. It all started with a massive spending bill and then kind of unexpectedly escalated to these surprising threats about deportation.
Right. And our mission here is to really unpack the core issues behind all this drama. We'll look at the legal facts versus the, let's say, political talk.
And try to get a handle on the wider implications for business, for immigration policies.
So precisely. We've gone through a whole bunch of news reports, legal takes, direct statements, trying to pull out the key nuggets for you, basically give you a shortcut to understanding what's going on.
Okay, let's dive in. The spark, it seems, was this thing Trump called his One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
That's the one. And the sources describe it as, well, a multi-trillion-dollar economic proposal. Huge scope.
Like what kind of scope are we talking?
We're talking major military and defense spending increases, big infrastructure projects, tax reforms especially for small businesses, more healthcare funding, even education initiatives for underserved areas. It really aimed to touch, well, almost everything.
Sounds incredibly ambitious.
Yeah.
Almost like a complete overhaul.
It does. And the White House, naturally, was promoting it as this historic investment in America's future. A big, bold plan.
But not everyone saw it that way.
Oh, definitely not. Critics jumped on it pretty fast, calling it financially reckless, and that's exactly where Elon Musk came in, very loudly.
Okay, so Musk objected. Publicly.
Very publicly. He slammed the bill, called the spending outrageous and unsustainable, a dangerous overreach. He even used terms like fiscal insanity.
Fiscal insanity, wow. What was his main worry?
He basically argued it could collapse the economy, trigger a national debt crisis. His concerns really line up with that strong, conservative fiscal viewpoint about government spending getting out of control.
And looking at the numbers, you can sort of see where that concern comes from, right? Even if you don't agree with the conclusion.
Well, yeah. The sources we looked at said the bill was projected to raise the U.S. debt ceiling by something like $5 trillion.
$5 trillion.
Yeah. And add about $3.3 trillion to deficits over 10 years. Plus, there were parts that would cut back on health insurance and food subsidies for some lower-income folks.
So when Musk says something like, if we continue printing money like this, we'll collapse the economy, he's tapping into a real anxiety for some people about debt and spending.
Exactly. It's not just a random comment. It reflects a significant concern about fiscal discipline that resonates with many conservatives.
And Trump. He didn't just let that criticism slide, I take it.
Not a chance. The retaliation was classic Trump, you might say. Swift and maybe a bit ambiguous.
What happened?
A reporter asked him about potentially deporting Musk, given the criticism. And Trump just said, we'll take a look.
Just like that. We'll take a look.
Just like that. And boom, political firestorm ignited. A seemingly casual remark, but with, massive implications.
That's incredible. Did he give any reason why he'd even suggest looking into deporting Musk?
His stated reason was that Musk was, quote, upset about the bill eliminating the electric vehicle EV mandate.
Linking it to Musk's business interests.
Exactly. Trump went on to suggest that without those government subsidies, Elon would probably have to close up shop and head back home to South Africa. That's a direct quote.
Wow. And didn't he also mention something about investigations?
He did. He floated the idea that the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, remember that? The one Musk briefly headed?
Oh, yeah, DOGE. The irony.
Right. Trump suggested DOGE could investigate Musk's government contracts. It definitely sounded like a threat aimed right at his businesses.
So this calculated ambiguity you mentioned, it's kind of Trump's signature move.
It often seems that way. It stirs up his base, sends a warning to opponents, and paints him as fighting against these, quote, elitist billionaires. It creates a narrative.
And Musk's response, did he just ignore it?
No, he hit back directly. Sarcastic comments, things like, just plain wrong, so disappointing, and probably the most quoted one, I'll start packing for Mars.
Packing for Mars, okay. A clear dismissal, but acknowledging how wild the threat was.
Pretty much. Which brings us to the really critical question here. The whole deportation idea. Legally speaking, is that even possible for a U.S. citizen?
Right, let's get into that. The deportation dilemma. Legal reality versus maybe political theater.
Okay, first things first. Let's be clear on Musk's status. He was born in South Africa, yes, but he legally became an American citizen back in 2002.
So he's a naturalized citizen.
Correct. And he also has Canadian citizenship through his mother. But despite these facts, some rumors started swirling.
Rumors like...
Well, sources mention figures like Steve Bannon pushing this conspiracy theory that maybe Musk was an illegal immigrant at some point, or maybe his naturalization wasn't legitimate. Something about old student visa issues, potentially.
Huh. So trying to cast doubt on his citizenship itself.
Exactly. It gained some traction in certain online spaces, even though the legal facts are pretty clear.
So what do the legal experts actually say about deporting a citizen? Or revoking citizenship?
Well, constitutional lawyer Amanda Lewis stated it very clearly. You can't deport a citizen. It's not legally feasible. That's pretty much the consensus.
Not feasible. So it's not just difficult, it's impossible.
Under normal circumstances, yes. Revoking citizenship, the legal term is denaturalization, is extremely rare. It requires proving really serious things.
Like what kind of things?
Like showing there was material fraud during the naturalization process itself, or proving acts of treason, really high bars.
And the experts agree these don't apply to Musk.
Universally, yeah. They all say those conditions are nowhere near met in Musk's case. They call Trump's comment things like symbolic, a political stunt, not something legally actionable.
So the legal impossibility really highlights the strength of constitutional protections, doesn't it? Rule of law over just, political whim.
Absolutely. It affirms that citizenship isn't something that can just be taken away lightly based on political disagreements.
What about the Canadian citizenship? Could that be a factor, like an exit plan?
Well, hypothetically, sure, he has it. But even in Canada, revoking citizenship is also described as fairly rare and usually needs proof of fraud. A purely political move is unlikely there too without changing their laws.
Gotcha. And didn't Musk make some dismissive comment about Canada himself?
He did, yeah. He tweeted something like Canada is not a real country, which he apparently deleted later. So maybe not his preferred backup plan.
Okay, so the threat against Musk specifically seems legally empty, but we need to connect this to the bigger picture, right? Trump's broader talk about deportation.
Exactly. This wasn't just about Musk. Trump has explicitly promised, if reelected, to carry out the largest domestic deportation operation in American history. He's used terms like a shock and awe blitz using executive orders.
Largest ever. That sounds massive. How would that even work practically?
Well, the plans reportedly involve seriously scaling up federal agencies like DHS and CBP, potentially federalizing state National Guard units, and deputizing state and local police to make immigration arrests and conduct raids.
Deputizing local police for immigration raids. That sounds like a huge shift.
It would be. And the reports also mention plans to grant these deputized officers immunity for potential civil rights violations during these operations.
Immunity, that raises serious questions. And what about detention?
The plans reportedly include setting up vast detention camps for immigrants awaiting deportation. It paints a picture of a really significant mobilization of government power focused on immigration enforcement.
And crucially, who would be targeted? Is it just undocumented immigrants?
This is a key point from the sources. These operations could potentially involve investigating, questioning, and even arresting people of all immigration statuses. That includes U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents if they happen to be in the areas targeted for raids.
So even citizens could get caught up in this. That's concerning. It really expands the potential impact.
It does. And Trump's rhetoric around it, like saying immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country or calling some animals, definitely fuels the concern and raises the temperature on the whole issue.
Okay, so given all that, the potential government reach, the specific threats against Musk, and let's look at the deeper implications. Tech power, government power, and maybe how people could push back.
Right. Because this isn't just abstract. This feud could have very real, perilous downsides for Musk's companies.
Like the government contracts.
Right.
Trump mentioned cutting those.
Exactly. Think about SpaceX. Sources say it's received at least $20.9 billion with a B in government contracts over 18 years, mostly NASA and the Defense Department.
$20 billion. That's not just pocket change. That's fundamental to their business.
Absolutely. Losing even a fraction of that would be a massive blow.
And it's not just contracts, right? There are regulatory issues, too.
Oh, huge ones. Tesla relies on regulators like the DOT for autonomous driving tech, faces potential tariffs on things like Chinese battery parts. The FAA licenses every SpaceX launch. They've even fined SpaceX before.
What about his other ventures?
Neuralink needs FDA approval for its brain implants. X, formerly Twitter, has its money platform plans, which likely involve financial regulation. Even his new AI supercomputer facility in Memphis apparently faces potential EPA scrutiny over air permits.
So basically, when your empire is that big and diverse, you're constantly interacting with and potentially vulnerable to government agencies.
Pretty much every arm of the government could potentially become a pressure point.
But isn't there a flip side? Does the government also need Musk?
Ah, yes. The mutual dependence. This is where it gets really interesting. The government, especially NASA and the Pentagon, relies heavily on SpaceX.
For launches, you mean?
For launches, yes, they're often faster and cheaper. And critically, SpaceX is currently the only American company that can fly astronauts to the International Space Station and back.
The only one. So the U.S. space program is kind of dependent on Musk right now.
In a very real way, yes. It highlights this complex power dynamic when the government relies so much on one private company for something so vital. Well, who really has the leverage? It blurs the lines between national security, innovation, and private business.
Fascinating. So if the government can exert pressure, but also needs Musk, it's a complicated dance.
Very much so, which maybe brings us to resistance. If these broad deportation plans or even targeted actions were to move forward, how could they be challenged?
What are the mechanisms? You mentioned legal challenges earlier.
Right. Litigation is a big one. Lawsuits arguing violations of constitutional rights like the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches, the Fifth and 14th for due process, even something called the suspension clause, which protects against unlawful detention.
And these have worked before against Trump policies.
Yes, lawsuits were key in stopping or modifying things like family separations, the attempts to end DACA, and changes to temporary protected status, TPS. The courts definitely act as a check. And remember, proving fraud for denaturalization is extremely hard.
Okay, so legal battles. What else? Congress.
Congress holds the power of the purse. They could, in theory, refuse to fund mass ICE operations or detention camps or limit how funds are used.
So cut off the money supply.
Basically. Plus, they can conduct aggressive oversight hearings, subpoenas to investigate potential abuses, and bring things to light. It can be slow, but it's a tool.
What about state and local governments? Can they do anything?
Yes, that's another layer. State or city officials can choose not to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. They can set up firewall policies.
Like sanctuary cities, that kind of thing.
That kind of principle, yeah. Plus, they can provide resources, legal aid for immigrants. Governors could issue pardons for state crimes that might trigger deportation. Some states allow driver's licenses regardless of immigration status. It creates friction against federal plans.
So a kind of decentralized resistance.
Exactly. And finally, never underestimate public opinion.
How does that play a role?
Well, building counter-narratives to xenophobia, debunking misinformation, really highlighting the contributions immigrants make economically, culturally, that can shift the political ground.
And the sources suggest public opinion isn't necessarily behind harsh enforcement.
Right. Polls consistently show voters tend to reject cruel enforcement-only measures. There seems to be broader support for approaches that combine border management with pathways to legal status. So public pressure can be quite powerful.
Wow. So this whole Trump-Musk thing, it starts as this personal feud almost over a spending bill.
Yeah, seemingly personal.
But when you unpack it, it just opens up these huge questions about government power, corporate influence, the law, individual rights, immigration. It's all interconnected.
It really is. It's like a case study in the power struggles playing out today. You've got this massive tech influence bumping up against established government authority, and it impacts real people, real lives, real legal principles.
Absolutely. And this whole situation, the political talk, the legal nuts and bolts, the very human side of it, it really forces you to think about governing in this, well, incredibly complex and fast-changing world.
It leaves us with some big questions, doesn't it? Like, how do we strike that balance between national interests and individual liberties, especially when these huge sweeping policies get proposed?
And what's the real cost, not just in dollars, but the human cost of chasing these big, sometimes aggressive visions for the country?
Yeah, critical questions.
So as you think about all this, consider how these dynamics might be shaping not just Washington politics, but maybe your own community, and how these high-level clashes echo downwards. Definitely something to keep pondering.